team. You know, that's for my team. That is by, who's that by, man?
Don Tex.
Don Tex.
He's talking about my team, actually. I'm a Cowboys fan.
I'm a Cowboy.
You're a Redskins fan.
I'm a Cowboy fan.
Unfortunately.
I'm a Cowboy fan. Yeah.
This season.
Yeah. what was that record last season?
Better than the Redskins.
Well, then I'm a Cowboy fan for sure. That's for my team by Don Tex. Send a shout out to Don Tex and to my man Howard's at Howard's Catfish over in Mesquite, Texas. So, hey, we're doing that. We got an intern. He's there too. Hopefully he's taking some pictures or something like that to go ahead and document the day's show. So if you take some pictures, certainly would appreciate that. But for my team, we still on the same team we were talking about. For my team this time, I'm with one of my good friends, Dr. Michael Phillips. His book, The White Metropolis, is a must-read. This is our commission radio show book of the week called White Metropolis. So I want you to read it. And one of the things in White Metropolis it states about Alan Brooks. And Alan Brooks doesn't have any statues for him. Alan Brooks doesn't have any commemorations for him unless you're talking about Sankofa that recently did one just this past year. Alan Brooks was lynched. His body was taken away from Adolphus, where he was a 68-year-old black man, but he was accused of doing something that he didn't do, and as it basically put, he was lynched in downtown Dallas. And if you go down to Ackett Street, I believe it's Ackett in Maine, if I'm not mistaken. Ackett in Maine, that's when you make that crossing on that parking lot, well, that's where he was lynched at. So that's what we're talking about here. But we also talking about Confederate memorials. And I'm with, again, I stated Dr. Michael Phillips. How you been?
Oh, I've been fine. Good to see you again. Yeah, we've been working on this, and actually Ed was an early supporter of this effort to really end this propaganda about the past. And we have made a real big effort, both of us, to address the issue of these Confederate monuments that are all over the city of Dallas. We have a park named after Robert E. Lee, who was a Confederate general. There's a statue of him there where he's on his horse. There's what's really grotesque is there's a replica of Lee's plantation, and people have weddings there. And I find that particularly shocking because, and I know this would be a comparison that might disturb some people, but it's sort of like, you know, Adolf Hitler got married in a bunker in Berlin as the Allies were about to get him. It would be like if you had a replica of Hitler's bunker, people got married there, you know, to get married at, because these plantations, of course, were scenes of suffering, rape, places where people's bodies were stolen, and the wealth they created was stolen from them. And it's a place of celebration, this replica of Lee's. It's called Arlington House. And we have that. We have a Confederate War Memorial where we have this 60-foot pedestal with a Confederate soldier put on top of it. And there are 4 figures in the Confederacy, 3 generals, including Robert E. Lee again. You have Jefferson Davis, who's the president of the Confederacy. He's memorialized there. At Fair Park, we have a giant seal of the Confederacy in the Hall of State. We have other figures on the park grounds that represent the Confederacy. There's a mural that has 3 Confederate generals included in the mural. This is all over the place. We have schools named after Confederate generals. And my position is that this needs to come down. It's 2017. This doesn't speak to what Dallas stands for, what Dallas believes, that this is essentially telling the world that Dallas still embraces white supremacy and the idea that black people are inferior and, in fact, are a property, that we need to make a statement by taking these monuments down, these tributes to the Confederacy down, and replacing them with art that expresses our belief in human dignity and freedom.
I understand that you've been catching some flack with that.
Oh, yeah. I wrote a column in the Dallas Morning News, and you had a column recently too. We should talk about that. I had a column in the Dallas Morning News where I expressed the desire to, as I put it, you know, it's like an exorcism. You get rid of the ghost of this racist history. And I received lots of email, and people made some really strange comparisons. A lot of people are accusing us of trying to erase history. And that's exactly the opposite of what we're doing. And that's the point I want to make, is these monuments aren't history. They're lies about history. They're propaganda. They misinform people. They make people who are traitors and slave owners heroes. You go there, you're not provided any information about what these men did. The fact that they started a war that killed 750,000 people. You receive no useful education. What you're seeing is that these people are men to be admired.
Right.
And so we don't have memorials that show slave auctions. We don't have memorials that show slaves being whipped, and also we don't have monuments. I've often wanted to have a Nat Turner memorial. I wanted to have people who rebelled honored, who rebelled against a peculiar institution. We don't have so many civil rights leaders in Dallas are not recognized by statues or monuments or plaques. And so this tells a false history. It's lies about the past. And so one person said, well, if you take down the Lee statue, that's like taking down a Holocaust memorial. And I found that comparison incomprehensible, because we're not trying to erase knowledge of unpleasant things. The fact is, these statues don't tell unpleasant truths. And I would like both the heroic aspect, the truly heroic aspect of Dallas history reflected in its public art, but I would also like an honest reckoning of the evils of the past, because this is a city that grew rich, that its wealth was built by the unpaid labor of African Americans, and not just during slavery, but the whole area. We were surrounded by cotton growing area. Sharecroppers who were robbed of the wealth they created. That went on for decades. The sharecropping went on until the 1930s, really, when the subsidy system, and the New Deal changed. None of that is told by these monuments. They really. And they normalize, and that's the other dangerous thing, they normalize white supremacy today. You have that man, Dylan Roof, that young man in South Carolina who massacred those people at that church in South Carolina. And he surrounded himself with Confederate memorabilia. He posed with pictures of Confederate battle flags. There's no accident that, for instance, the Ku Klux Klan has always used the symbols of the Confederacy, that these southern states added Confederate battle flags to their state flags, did so when there's resistance to the
That was a recent deal.
Yeah, in the 1950s.
It wasn't always there. It was the 1950s.
Not always there. In the 1950s, they started changing their flag designs to have the Confederate battle flag because they were fighting school segregation. And this is something a lot of people don't realize. People who try to claim that these Confederate symbols aren't racist. One interesting thing in Europe, you have a lot of neo-Nazi groups, modern Nazi groups, modern fascists in Europe. And in a lot of these countries after World War II, they made it illegal to use Nazi symbols because they didn't want to see the Nazi party come back. Well, now these modern Nazis use Confederate battle flags. You actually see those. Trump made a speech in Poland. The government in Poland's really right-wing, and there were people waving Confederate battle flags in Poland, of all places. So this has become an international symbol of hate and white supremacy, and there's no reason why we should honor this. This doesn't reflect the values of the city that we want to embrace today. And so I'm really encouraged. We have one city council member who's publicly come out, and he's called these monuments racist. Phil Kingston, he's been out in front and said, and I'm hoping we get, we need a majority on the city council. We need 4 people on the city council to support this, and we need 8 to vote for, some effort to begin the process of removing these. But I'm hoping that the public speaks and, communicates to their council members and, just say, and I would say the whole north central Texas area, that this reflects on all of us, because there are people who live in the suburbs, work in the city, and vice versa. We all have to have ownership of these racist symbols, and it's time for them to go away.
To your point, I talked to Kevin Felden, who's at a NAACP convention, and he pledged his support as well. And I've been speaking to the other southern sector city council people, so I expect there to be some movement on that. Phil Kingston, Councilman Kingston, that the Lee Park, that's in his district, right?
Yeah, it's in Oak Lawn. Yeah, and that's the thing. The residents there, from what I can gather, don't want that statue, and that's not always the name that park had.
What was the name?
You wrote about it, so why don't you tell them?
The original name, thank you, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
The original, and you can catch this in the North Dallas Gazette, the original name for the park was Oak Lawn Park.
Right.
Oak Lawn Park was, it was built, and also the shrine to Lee was done by President Franklin Roosevelt in 1936.
Yeah, they did a big thing with.
Oh yeah, exactly. He came to town, and he had a big speech at Fair Park, and then from Fair Park he motorcaded over to Oak Lawn, and then he went ahead and christened the Lee Park. And then he had a lot of great things to say about General Robert E. Lee.
Yeah,
but no blacks were allowed to be at that park.
No, there were none. It was a segregated park, and
right.
Of course. He had polio, so he was in his presidential car. There was a button he pushed to unveil the statue, and it's really imposing. It is. Larger than life, and they do make Lee appear to be a larger than life person. And I really want to make clear about this. Let's just talk about Robert E. Lee for a second, because white Southerners have had this myth that Lee really didn't favor secession, and that Lee regretted the fact that slavery was there, and he was a gentleman who had loyalty to the state. This is a man who was really passionately devoted to slavery. He was a brutal slave owner, and there's this story told by one of his former slaves, Wesley Norris, after he was emancipated, where he escaped from Lee along with another slave, and they were captured, and they were brought back to the plantation. Lee was furious, and at one point this Mr. Norris stood up to Lee, and after he'd been captured, he says, "I consider myself already free." And Lee told him, "I'm going to teach you a lesson you'll never forget." And so they stripped him, his back was bare. The other slave, he ordered a man to whip, an overseer to whip him 50 times, which is extraordinary. You know the biblical story of Jesus, right? 39 lashes. This is 50 lashes. And then they literally rubbed salt, they rubbed brine into the wounds to make it hurt more, the lacerated flesh. And after, that's before the war. And then during the war, of course, he fought. This was a war dedicated to preserving slavery forever. After the war was over, he was an intense opponent of emancipation. He called for African Americans to be expelled from his state of Virginia. He saw no role for African Americans politically, ever. He clearly stated that he believed that they were not intellectually equal to white people. And his students, he became this is an amazing thing. I can't think of another country where you've had an armed rebellion against the government, war treason, where there were not really serious consequences for the people who led the rebellion. Life terms, long-term imprisonments, in a lot of countries, executions, and lots of executions. Lee led this rebellion, and he never faced trial for treason. And in fact, he became college president. He became a president of Washington College, it was called then, in Virginia. While he was president of Washington College, his students were known to be harassing black institutions, nearby, black schools, etc., vandalizing, whatever. He did nothing to stop it. When he died, I think it's 3 years after the war, he had the college was renamed Washington and Lee. He was honored this man who's said so many horrible things to his country. And people are saying, well, you can't judge a man by his whole career. His other major accomplishments, he participated in an imperialist war against Mexico. This is not a man we should have so many tributes to, including a school named after him.
Right.
This is absurd that when there's so many people who are under-recognized in Dallas history, Adelpha Callejo, many other people who have not received the recognition they deserve. But Lee does, and Lee's connection to Dallas history, by the way, is zero.
Nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing at all. One of the things that you had mentioned was that General Lee was honored after his death, and also he was honored while he was alive because he was allowed to be the president of the college. One of the things that happened as well was that he was captured by African American troops. That's one of the things that the Confederates don't say anything about.
Right.
So the same people he basically enslaved were the same people who actually captured him as well.
Yeah, it's amazing. This whole movement. If you look at it on a nationwide basis, some of the most reprehensible people get parks named after them. The very first national leader of the Ku Klux Klan was a man named Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was responsible for a massacre of African American soldiers at Fort Pillow in Tennessee, and he had a park named after him. You have all kinds of tributes to Nathan Bedford Forrest across the country. So this is time to stop. This is not appropriate for our era. Even if there weren't a single person of color in Dallas, it wouldn't be appropriate. And that's the thing. It's easy to note how African Americans are insulted by these monuments, but I really do think they poison the minds of white people to make them feel like racism is okay. It normalizes racism today, and it even says that a person can devote their lives primarily to the oppression of African Americans and still be seen as a hero.
Very powerful stuff. When we come back, we'll ask you some more questions on the comparisons of how it's going in Dallas with the comparisons of how it went in New Orleans.
Okay.
My name is Dr. Irvin D. Simpson Jr. I am the Executive Director for the Justice League of Texas.
No, yeah,
and
go
I
on music
want to
so they can
underline
hear.
our